Welcome, everybody, to the Scratch Podcast on a Thursday, February 6, 2025. My name is Alex Frank, covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media, and this is the Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media, covering Kentucky Wildcats, men's basketball, football, and baseball is starting, but men's basketball is going to be at the forefront of this podcast because when you think of Kentucky, you think of men's basketball, 8 national championships, many other Final Four appearances, a standard of excellence at the University of Kentucky when it comes to men's basketball. And unfortunately, the Wildcats are in a bit of a losing skid. Not a bit, they are in a losing skid. Losers of 4 of their last 5 games, including this past Tuesday night against the Ole Miss Rebels, 98-84. Kentucky now 15-7, 4-5 in the SEC. Coming up on today's show, we're going to recap Tuesday night's game at Ole Miss, why I'm not overly concerned, but I'm not going to sugarcoat the stretch that Kentucky is in. Plus, we'll look ahead to Saturday's game against South Carolina, why this is the game that I get the most nervous for when it comes to any of the teams that I root for. Bengals, Kentucky, Reds, you name it, Knicks, Rangers. And so Tuesday night at Ole Miss was, it was a really, how do I say this? It was not a good night for the Wildcats. At one point, Carl Ravitch, who was calling the game on ESPN, he's called a lot of Kentucky games recently. He's called a lot of Kentucky games this season. And he said at the end of the first half, after Murray's three-point play, after Jaden Murray's three-point play, he said that Ole Miss looked like they were having a lot of fun and Kentucky looked like they were miserable. And it was the culmination of what was just a really bad first half, and there's no way around that. There's no way around the way Kentucky played defensively in the first half, and even offensively. They only scored 31 points. And I think any other night, most other nights, that would be okay. If you're playing good defense, you may be ahead. If you're playing average defense, you're down by a few points. If you're playing not so average or below average defense, you're down by maybe double digits, 10 to a dozen. But in this case, the Wildcats were down by 24 points, and it wasn't good. But the more I've thought about it, and having rewatched the game, and because I find when I watch the game twice, the first time live, when as a fan, the emotions are a huge part of it because there's a lot of swings, and basketball's a game of runs, and you're just so pumped up because your team is playing and you want them to win, and you're nervous for 40 minutes. There's a tightening in your chest. There's a stress and a tension in your shoulders. And so that's what the first time is. The second time is, okay, the game's happened. We've had an opportunity to dissect it. We've had an opportunity to, digest it. We've had an opportunity to, go through the emotions. Mark Pope talked about this after the Arkansas game, the grieving process, which I think is a little extreme, but at the same time, this is Kentucky basketball. So, every game matters. Every single one you play matters because, let's be honest, Kentucky is arguably the gold standard of college basketball. They have 8 national championships. I get UCLA has 11, but Kentucky has had a lot of rich history come through that program. And I think when we look at this game, the more I've watched it, and again, the second time around gives you I think for me at least, the opportunity to watch it through a rational, measured lens, almost like more of an objective kind of view. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I am as positive as any fan there is that I know of. right? Now, I'm going to be realistic with you, and we're going to talk about, if not on this show, next week's show, about what are reasonable expectations for this team. Do we need to temper them? Do we need to? What constitutes a successful season? Given the circumstances, although there's great news on Lamont Butler that he's, starting to go through non-contact practice. Maybe that means he comes back next Tuesday for the home game against Tennessee. Kentucky beat Tennessee without Lamont Butler, so that makes you think, hey, they can beat Tennessee with him. But it's also, Carissa has been out since early December. This team is deficient in terms of its defense, its athleticism, but yet I still feel like they're a really good, well-rounded, well-coached basketball team. And I feel like they've made strides this season. And even in Tuesday night, which was, let's be honest, not a good night. The way the Wildcats fought in the second half, there was at least a point in that second half where I at least thought, is Kentucky going to come back and win this thing? Like, it got, after the way the first half ended, where Ole Miss goes on this blistering run. I mean, it went from 39-28 to 55-31 in the snap of a finger. And so, for that to have happened, a 16-3 run to stretch the lead from 11, and let's be honest, when it was 11, I think a lot of us were like, Ole Miss is going to miss at some point, right? And they never did. And so, the way I perceived the first half rewatching it was a combination of, yes, Kentucky was not good. Their defense was, let's be honest, atrocious. And it was also that Ole Miss was literally making every open or tough shot. And sometimes there's only so much you can do. Could Kentucky have done better offensively? Could they have hit some free throws? Could they have made some shots at the rim? Sure. If the deficit had been 18 at the most, there's a chance Kentucky comes back and maybe ties the game. Heck, maybe takes the lead in the second half. I just thought, and Carl and Jimmy Dykes, Jimmy Dykes calling the game with Carl on ESPN, were talking. These were two teams in desperate need of wins. You had Ole Miss, who started 4-0 in the SEC, had lost 4 out of 5, had just given up 92 to Auburn. And I'll say this, Ole Miss was good in that game. Like, Ole Miss did an excellent job of not letting Auburn's Jani Broome take over the game in the second half. He had a good first half. Second half, he was a no-show practically. And yet Auburn still scored 92 points. That may just be how good Auburn is. But Ole Miss, I mean, to watch that team play basketball, when you have seven players with 1,000 or more points, Ole Miss and Kentucky, there was a graphic during that Auburn-Ole Miss game that ESPN showed that Ole Miss and Kentucky are one of two programs to have 7 players with 1,000 or more career points, which is amazing to think about. And both teams have built their programs, at least Kentucky this year, through the transfer portal. So you get guys who are really experienced. And Ole Miss has a lot of experience. Sean Padula, Jamin Brakefield, Jaden Murray. I mean, Dre Davis, Malik Dia. You look at these guys that have been on college basketball's biggest stage. That's why Ole Miss wasn't intimidated on Tuesday night when they played Kentucky. So the first half was just Ole Miss was in such a good rhythm. They were in a phenomenal rhythm. ball movement, shot fakes, knocking down shots. Kentucky did all they could to stay in the game the first 16 minutes of the first half. And I think, again, it was the combination of being shell-shocked by what happened on Saturday against Arkansas, combined with Ole Miss being ridiculous from three-point range. I mean, they were ridiculous on Tuesday night. They simply did not miss in the first half. Every shot that they threw went in. I mean, the nets were that wide that's how good Ole Miss was. And so I think the second half, you're down 24 if you're the Wildcats. You're wondering if this is, the breaking point, if this is where, first year, if it's transition, if it's whatever it is. Like whatever it is with Kentucky. Is this where it catches up to them? If it's injuries, if it's being deficient, not being athletic enough of a team like Ole Miss is, because I mean you're going to run into athletic teams like Auburn, Alabama, Missouri, Tennessee, who's athletic defensively. You're going to run into some athletic teams in the SEC. Some of them you've already faced. Some of them you've beaten already. But for me to sit up here and say that I'm deeply concerned about this Wildcats team's ability come March, I'm not worried about March yet. I'm worried about what does Kentucky have to do to right this 4 losses in their last 5 games. Because I do think starting 3-1 in the SEC, beating Florida at home in a high-scoring game after being down 11 early in the first half, a 16-0 run completely changed the game. I do think that beating Mississippi State on the road, scoring 95 points. I do think beating Texas A&M, who's now in the top 10, beating them, beating Tennessee on the road without Lamont Butler or Kirk Carissa. I think those wins in the SEC, and that's in addition to beating Duke, who looks like who's one of the 2 best teams in the country, and then beating Gonzaga in Washington and Seattle. I think those wins, in addition to the SEC wins that have been really impressive, have kind of covered up a lot of things that this team is deficient at. And again, this year is a transition year. Mark Pope, I'm not losing any faith in him. Okay? I love what Mark Pope is doing. I think he's tenacious. I think he's going to get the most out of this team, wherever that ends up in the SEC regular season, the tournament, March Madness. You are seeing that this Kentucky team, okay, they're going to scrap. They're going to be well coached. The sum is greater than the parts, right? And those are my favorite kinds of teams because no one's expecting Kentucky right now to be a huge factor come the SEC tournament or March Madness. However, this is Kentucky. And yes, it's no longer John Calipari on the sidelines. There may not be a lot of McDonald's All-Americans like there were in 2015 or any other year, 2012. I mean, this is still a Kentucky team that is really experienced. And I think along with that, getting Lamont Butler back, I don't think we understand how huge that is. You're going to get back a 2-time Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, added to a 3-time CAA Defensive Player of the Year in Amari Williams. This team's defense, and this team overall has a lot of experience. You've got Conference Defensive Players of the Year. You've got 6th Men of the Year from previous conferences. That's Jackson Robinson and BYU, who followed Mark Pope to Kentucky. You have guys that have played in a Final Four, a national championship. Guys that have hit big shots. Lamont Butler, Final Four against FAU for San Diego State 2023. This team, for as new and for, somewhat young, I mean, Brandon Garrison's only a sophomore. For as young as they might be, there's some experience on this team. And they've played high major basketball. And even a guy like Amari Williams, who led the CAA in blocks 3 straight years, who had a triple-double on Tuesday night in a 14-point loss. First triple-double by a 7-footer in Division I men's college basketball in the last 20 years. And think about the great players who were 7-footer around his size, Amari Williams, that never had a triple-double. Zion Williamson never had a triple-double. Tyler Hansbrough never had a triple-double. I mean, the fact that Amari Williams, who has been this team's primary point guard, or one of them, with Lamont Butler out. And again, when you don't have your point guard, that affects you on both offense and defense. So getting Lamont Butler back, whenever he comes back, which I think now is going to be sooner than maybe some of us were fearing, that's going to be crucial for this team. And the fact that Kentucky was able to fight in the second half and make this a game. I mean, it was a game. Down 78-67, I was like, is Kentucky going to win this game? Like, I mean, what are the chances here? And then Ole Miss hits a very tough 3, and you're like, okay. I mean, let's be honest. Ole Miss had a ridiculously good night. They were just so on, shooting-wise. Final numbers from that game on Tuesday night. Ole Miss was 13 of 30 from 3. 9 of 17 in the first half. So they cooled off in the second half. They still shot 54.7% from the field for the game. I mean, sometimes there's nothing you can do. But, I mean, again, if you want to know why I think Tuesday night was a combination of, still being a little shell-shocked from Saturday, you had some momentum. You had just snapped a 2-game losing streak by beating Tennessee. You're thinking, okay, we're going to roll this Arkansas team. And for a while, it looked like they were. They're just in a bit of a funk right now. I mean, teams are going to go through that. Unless you're Auburn or Duke, teams are going to go through funks this season. But you can take solace in the fact that you've beaten Duke, you've beaten Florida, who is really good, you've beaten Tennessee, that has looked really good since you beat them, and you play them again next Tuesday, when there's a very good chance they're going to be number 4 still in the country. It may be higher if somebody gets knocked off in front of them, like a Duke or an Iowa State or an Auburn. But you've beaten them. And the thing is, like, 4 and 5 in the SEC, you're still number 14 in the country. Are you going to drop after losing Ole Miss? Maybe. That wouldn't shock me if they did. But again, you're still going to be ranked. As long as you beat South Carolina on Saturday, which, God forbid you don't, as long as you beat them and take care of business, you're going to be ranked. Might drop to like 17 or 18, something like that. But a win over Tennessee keeps you going like that. Can this team get back to the top 10 before the end of the season? I don't necessarily know. I think I have to be realistic if that question's asked to me. If you ask me, do I think Kentucky is going to get back to the top 10? Realistically, I have to say, you know what? I don't know with this team's injuries. I don't know with this team's deficiencies. And the fact that this is a transition year, I just don't know if that's feasible. Even though they were ranked number 4 back in early December, even though they were ranked number 9 or number 8 when they played Texas A&M and Alabama, even though they were number 9 when they played Vanderbilt, because this team is still going through growing pains. The growing pains were just pushed back until late January and early February, which honestly a good thing. But again, that goes back to this side of the conversation. The expectations were raised because you beat Duke, Gonzaga, Florida, A&M, and Tennessee. This team can do that. And that's why when you're on Twitter, if you were on Twitter Wednesday night and you were seeing if you were seeing guys, colleagues of mine who I cover, Kentucky with from a sea of blue, I also work for a sea of blue in addition to CLNS Media. But a lot of my colleagues were tweeting stuff that Mark Pope was saying about how from the Mark Pope radio show that he emerged from the locker room with blood on his hand. And then you're seeing tweets that there was furniture broken in the locker room or furniture completely destroyed. And honestly, I like that. Not that the furniture was destroyed, but I like the passion, and I like the fact that what Kentucky, they know that Kentucky, Mark Pope and this coaching staff know that what they're doing isn't good enough right now, and they're frustrated about that. I love that. It's one thing to just acknowledge it. It's another thing to really feel and embrace it, right? We struggle sometimes with that as a society. We acknowledge things aren't good enough, but do we actually embrace that and are willing to work to change it? I think Kentucky is. I think they are. I mean, you give up 89 and 98 points your last two games, yeah, that's going to be frustrating when you lose. 102 to Alabama. Okay, Alabama's ridiculously good offensively. Vanderbilt 74, not bad. I mean, should Kentucky have won that game? Sure. And the other thing, too, that's crazy to me about Tuesday night is this. Kentucky had 21 assists to 8 turnovers. That's a great night, and most nights. Ole Miss had 24 assists to 1 turnover. One. O-N-E. I always wonder why 1 is spelled that way. At least in that use of the word 1. Okay, now I'm going back to 4th grade spelling. But anyway, yeah, it was a because the second half, I think you saw a Kentucky team that looked faster defensively. You saw a team that attacked the rim. You saw a team that looked more engaged. You saw a team that just looked more cohesive. You saw a team that looked like, hey, we have a chance to win this game. And even if we don't, we're going to carry some momentum into Saturday. You got 2 home games, 3 of your next 4 games at Rupp Arena. But Saturday's game against South Carolina is one of it's the game I get most nervous for, right? And I always say this. There are two teams that I get the most nervous for when I watch them play every single game. The Bengals, because I've been a season ticket holder for many years. My family's had them since 1968. Our falls are basically revolved around family gatherings and the Bengals. Okay? And then Kentucky. Right? Because look, this is a blue blood program. Every Kentucky game is heavily scrutinized, dissected, analyzed, etc. And you don't want to be the team that loses to a team that's winless, whether it be in the NFL or in conference play in college basketball. You don't want to lose to a team, that is going to be, that is winless coming in. South Carolina's 0-9 in the SEC. They were at one point 10-3. That's how good the SEC is. They were 10-3 following non-conference play. Now they're 10-12. But you can't just say, oh yeah, that's an easy win for Kentucky. Really? Really? We thought that against Georgia. They didn't win that game. We thought that against Arkansas. They didn't win that game. By the way, though, both of those games were double-digit losses. Kentucky has 5 losses in the SEC. Georgia, Arkansas, and Ole Miss are by double digits. Alabama and Vanderbilt are not. But this game on Saturday. So we look at South Carolina, right? We look at South Carolina, and why aren't they winning games? Well, they've lost a lot of close games. In SEC play, they lost by 3 at home to Auburn. They lost by 3 at Vanderbilt. They lost by 1 at home against Florida. They lost at home against Mississippi State in overtime by 5. And they just lost at home to Texas A&M by 4. But make no mistake, this South Carolina team still has talent. They have two guys, Colin Murray Boyles, who wears number 30, and then Jamari Thomas, who wears number 6. Both of them are averaging over 13 points a game. Murray Boyles is averaging 8.8 rebounds a game. Nick Pringle is their only other player averaging more than 5 rebounds per game at 6.4. Their leading assist man is Thomas. He is 60. They have 2 other players, though, with 50 or more assists. Murray Boyles also leads the team in blocks with 30 and steals with 36. Only one other player, Pringle, has more than 10 blocks. And only one other player, Thomas, has more than 25 steals. Shooting-wise, they're decent. Murray Boyles is hitting 59.7% of his shots from the field. Then you have Nick Pringle, who's shooting 60.2%. He hasn't attempted a 3 all season. Then you have Morris Ugasuk, if I mispronounced that correctly. I should have the pronunciation guy in front of me. Excuse me. Number 15. He's shooting 40.8% from the field and 43.4% from 3. And then Jamari Thomas shoots 37.2% from the field. Or from 3, excuse me. But the South Carolina team is not they're erratic, right? But you can't let that cause you to be erratic. You have to take advantage of it. Force turnovers, which South Carolina turns the ball over 13.1 times per game. So you're going to have to find a way to turn them over, get into transition. That's where you can shoot threes if you're Jackson Robinson or Kobe Brea or Ansley Almanor. That's where this game is going to be heavily decided. Don't let South Carolina's erratic ball handling cause you to be the same way. Take care of the ball, force turnovers, and you're going to win this game. You should win this game by double digits. Quite honestly, you should win this game by 20. I wouldn't be shocked if Kentucky came out and blitzed the Gamecocks. South Carolina has had they've given Kentucky a lot of problems over the years. Back when Frank Martin was there, and now with Lamont Paris, their head coach. But let's be honest. Kentucky's a much better team. They have more go-to scorers, more double-digit scorers. They take better care of the ball. They're a really good rebounding team. South Carolina is not. My 3 keys to the game on Saturday. Number 1, dominate the first 4 minutes. I'm not talking win the first 4 minutes. Like, okay, you're up 12-9. No. I'm talking about being up 18-4 like that. Make South Carolina and Lamont Paris believe they have no shot in this game. South Carolina, at some point, they're going to get over the hump, you would think. But frustration sets in when you can't get over the hump consistently and you're so close to doing so. If you come out, if you're Kentucky, if you hit some threes, if you get to the rim, if you play defense, and you're up 18-4, good night. Number 2 is rebounding. Kentucky won the rebound battle at Ole Miss. That's the crazy thing about this. They won the rebound battle 37-29, but great three-point shooting neutralizes that. South Carolina only averages coming into this game 35.6 rebounds a game. Now, they do only give up 32.4, but Kentucky, we know, is an excellent rebounding team. Right now, the Wildcats, so far this season, through 22 games, are averaging 40.2 rebounds per game. They have 2 players averaging more than 5, but then you have 2 players averaging 4.5, another one averaging 3.6, 3.1. Like, this is still a very good rebounding team in the Kentucky Wildcats. They should be able to impose their will on the glass on Saturday at 12 against South Carolina. And then number three, forced turnovers. Right? Kentucky opponents this season, they're turning the ball over 9.7 times per game. I would like to see that come up just a little bit, maybe to like a 10.3. Kentucky's turning it over 10.5 times per game. If you're Kentucky, find a way to force turnovers, and you are going to be in position to run South Carolina out of Rupp Arena very early Saturday afternoon. I think Kentucky does win this game handily. I'm going to go 88-74. I think Kentucky's going to take care of business. Do not overlook, though, South Carolina for Tennessee on Tuesday night. Win this game, get back to 5-5, and then if you can beat Tennessee at home, you're going to have some momentum. 6-5 in the SEC, 17-7 overall. You go to Texas, which, I mean, look, that's not going to be an easy game. Texas is a solid team. Rodney Terry's done a good job with that program since he took over as interim head coach 2 years ago. But there is still a lot of time and a lot of basketball left to be played. I still think this Kentucky team has 11-7 in the SEC in them. I don't think they're going to beat Alabama or Auburn, but I think they can steal a win against Tennessee, and I think they can also steal a win on the road in Missouri. Again, for as bad as Tuesday night was, I think it was a little bit more to do with Ole Miss having a ridiculously good night than it was Kentucky. If you take away the final 4 minutes of that first half, if that 16-3 run does not happen, that is a 13-point differential in a 14-point game. Kentucky has a chance at the end to win that game. If they see Ole Miss in the SEC tournament, I will take my chances. With a healthier team, I think by that point, Lamont Butler, maybe Kirk Carissa, who was my favorite player on this team early on this season, and probably still is because of what he can do and his emotional leadership that he provides. There's still a lot of time left for this team. Even after Tuesday night, I am not that concerned yet. Did the early wins raise expectations? Yes. Does that make this stretch frustrating? Yes. But I also understand that this at the surface is still a transition year. New head coach, new roster, new era. All right. Super Bowl 59, which I think is going to be a really great game. I think when all is said and done Sunday night, we are going to be talking about one of the best Super Bowls of all time. I'm going with the Chiefs 30-27. I think Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator, holds the key to this game. 17 years ago, we saw him halt the Patriots dynasty and perfect season in Super Bowl 42. I think he is the reason why the Chiefs dynasty cements itself as the greatest in NFL history on Super Bowl Sunday with a three-peat. And then I think that my biggest non-quarterback key to this game is George Karlaftis. Right? We know Chris Jones is going to make an impact on the defensive line, but how about George Karlaftis? Whether he's lined up against Eagles right tackle Lane Johnson or Eagles left tackle Jordan Mailata, that is where I'm really interested in seeing this game be decided. Because Karlaftis has had a really good postseason. He had a fantastic game against the Houston Texans in the divisional round. You didn't really see a lot of him in the AFC Championship game against the Bills, but he's still going to be an impact player in this game. I am really excited to watch him against that incredible Eagles offensive line. Because Chris Jones is the key. But if you have George Karlaftis making an impact, that is troublesome for Philadelphia. Great stuff today. Coming up next Monday, we're going to recap Kentucky against South Carolina and then turn the page to Tennessee next Tuesday night at Rupp Arena. Ooh, that's going to be a big matchup. It's a 7 o'clock game on ESPN next Tuesday. Of course, the focus is Saturday afternoon against South Carolina. It is a noon game at Rupp Arena. Pre-game coverage on the UK Sports Network starting at 10:30 with Tom Leach and Jack Goose Givens. Matt Jones and Kentucky Sports Radio to precede it at 9:30. It is a noon game on ESPN2, it looks like, with John Schriffen and Damian Fishback on the call. So it's on ESPN2. I could have sworn I saw on Kentucky's website that it is going to be on ESPN or SEC Network or something. So let me confirm that. It is on ESPN2. Okay, so it is on ESPN2, and it will be called by John Schriffen, who's a terrific announcer, and then Damian Fishback, who you see on the SEC Network on SEC Now sometimes on weeknights and during their college basketball, SEC basketball coverage. So good stuff, good stuff. Next Thursday, we'll recap Tennessee and look ahead to Texas, but don't want to get too far ahead. This is the game that matters. Saturday, Kentucky playing South Carolina, only meeting between the two teams this season. This has been the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media. I'm Alex Frank, covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Have a great Super Bowl weekend, Super Bowl Sunday. Please stay safe. If you're going out for the Super Bowl, choose a designated driver, because we want to see you. We want to hear from you. We want you to be as healthy as you can be. The weather's starting to get a little better. It's February. It's only February, as John Rothstein would say. And we want to have you continue to be a part of the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media. I'm Alex Frank. Have a great rest of your day, weekend, Super Bowl weekend, and Super Bowl Sunday. Enjoy the game on Saturday at Rupp Arena. And I'll talk to you next week, Monday, right here on the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media.